Welcome to week one. After taking the implicit association test, I'm going to give a brief response and reflection on the following topics. And so, after taking the IAT results, I'm going to share quickly which test I took and then my results. And so, first of all, I was really excited to take this implicit association test. In my psychology classes, we always talked about implicit bias. I felt comfortable enough to take the disability IET exam because part of my research in my undergraduate studies were central to uncovering implicit biases within people with disabilities. And so I did choose the one with disabilities. And just a brief background of my studies there were within disabilities. So we did conduct a Tinder-like graphic that had profile pictures. The profile pictures, along with their profile, were cropped of their physical disabilities in one, and then in the other, you were able to see their physical disability present in the profile. And so, based off of that, after many questions based on attitudes, we had similar findings to what my own implicit biases were. And so, in my own discovery of understanding bias within this category, even though I had studied it for about a year and was very aware of disabilities and bias within disabilities, I still had a moderate automatic preference towards abled persons over disabled persons. And so, in that test that we took, I knew exactly what they were doing with the keywords and the picture associations. And the point is to really just not think about it and to click, click, click on which side of the screen. And so in the back of my head, I knew what they were getting at when they were putting up, negatively connotated words and then having you answer specific questions about disabilities or abled persons. And so, despite that, I was still reflecting some bias towards abled persons. And so, going on to the next question, where do you think implicit biases come from? So, I think in general, they're societal beliefs and they are expressed through the setting in which we surround ourselves in. So if we're trained by society and these societal norms to have preferences of certain topics, certain people, it's really hard to unlearn them in this automatic process. And so being educated and being aware of one's own bias is the start to relieving that bias. And so I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But I just wanted to highlight a couple things from my research in the past and also my research professor. So he is a social psychologist, and in one of his research studies, he addresses how IETs can be threatening to one's own self view. And so, with the potential to reveal implicit prejudice, I'm going to give you a brief overview of the study. And so, the study reveals that people expect their IET results to indicate less implicit prejudice than the results actually do show. And they perceive the feedback from the IET as potentially threatening. In addition, people who would rather avoid learning their results regretted receiving their feedback. And in a couple more studies within this one that I'm talking about, some more participants declined to learn their IET results when cued to expect unfavorable rather than favorable results. And so finally, participants who received no expectation cue generally opted to receive their IET feedback, suggesting that participants likely expected a favorable IET feedback result. And so this just confirms kind of what we're talking about here, how even though I was very much aware of my bias and hoping that it wouldn't really be expressed through this IET test, I think a lot of people fear that their implicit prejudices are going to be exposed. And so this is something very difficult for people to accept, but I think this is a big part of how we can relieve those biases. And so the next prompt, some life experiences that have contributed to certain implicit biases within groups of people. And so I think for me, when people around me have shown strong preferences for supporting or avoiding certain types of groups, and so this can be as simple as the food we eat, to the stores we shop at, the institutions we learn from. All of these have an impact on our implicit biases. And so the next question, how do you think these implicit biases shape how you think and act in organizations and in society? Since I am more aware of the potential implicit biases that I may have, it takes a second or it takes a time of reflection in order to remove that bias and slowly engage in making better choices. So I like to think that I'm accepting of all God's people, and the Bible teaches us to love our neighbors, and I think the best way to really do that is to be a reflection of Jesus and really emulate the way he loved on people. And so being able to show that love and protect those who could possibly be a target of implicit or even explicit bias is something that I strive for. And lastly, what can you do to take ownership of this? And so I kind of touched on this earlier, but learning how to distinguish between like past experiences and bias is something that's really important. So a lot of people tend to push their implicit biases or push blame on the way they grew up, but never take responsibility for taking the time to recognize them. So after recognition, I think it's a lifelong learning process to take ownership of that implicit bias and how to better educate yourself and learn how to be an advocate for those groups who are targets of implicit bias. So that's all I have for today's topic, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.